Journalism is the first draft of history. Are you ready to write it? Join Vibrance Academy's news and reporting department and learn to navigate the digital age with integrity and impact. Your journey from the newsroom to the world starts here. Vibrance Academy. Real stories, real power.
The library occupied the oldest corner of the school, a high-ceilinged room where the shadows gathered early and lingered late. Rows of shelves stretched toward the rear, their contents spilling into the dimmer regions where the overhead lights could not reach. At the back, tucked between a sagging shelf of atlases and a window that faced the blank wall of the adjacent building, a single desk held a student hunched over a textbook. The light above this desk was the only illumination in the rear section, a fluorescent tube that hummed at a frequency just below conscious perception. Its glow fell in a tight circle, leaving the periphery to the darkness that had claimed it long ago. The student's hand moved across the page, a pencil scratching notes in the margin, the sound small and intimate against the vast silence of the space. A shadow moved on the wall beside her. She did not notice at first. Her attention remained fixed on the text, on the words that blurred and sharpened in the uneven light, on the density of information that required her complete focus. The shadow shifted again, a subtle elongation across the blank surface where the light from her desk met the encroaching dark. Her pencil stopped. Her eyes lifted from the page and traveled to the wall. The shadow was long and thin, a vertical stripe of deeper black against the gray of the painted cinder block. It stretched from near the ceiling to the floor, its edges soft, its form indistinct. It might have been the shadow of a shelf, of a hanging plant, of any of the ordinary objects that populated the library's rear. But the nearest shelf stood 3 feet to the left, and its shadow fell in a completely different direction, a squat rectangle that hugged the baseboard. This shadow belonged to nothing. The student watched it. The shadow did not move while she watched, holding its position with the patience of inanimate things. She looked away, toward the shelf, toward the window, toward any object that might cast such a shape. Nothing matched. As she looked back, the shadow had grown longer. The air around her changed. The temperature dropped. A slow seepage of cold that originated at the wall and spread outward, touching her first on the side of her face nearest the shadow, then creeping across her cheek, her neck, her shoulder. The fluorescent light above her flickered once, the hum dipping and recovering, and in that moment of diminished illumination, the shadow moved again. It was closer now, not longer only, but closer, its base having traveled across the wall toward her desk, its top remaining fixed near the ceiling as if attached to something leaning, something bending, something reaching. A sound emerged from the shadow's direction, a rhythmic sound, soft at first, then growing in definition. The sound of breathing, not her own breathing, which had stopped entirely in her chest, but another's, slow and deep and regular, each exhalation carrying a faint whistle, as if drawn through a passage too narrow for the air that passed through it. Inhale, and pause, and exhale, and pause, inhale. The rhythm continued without variation, a metronome of respiration that filled the space behind her, beside her, all around her. The shadow pulsed with each breath, expanding slightly on the inhale, contracting on the exhale. A living darkness pressed against the wall. The student's hand moved, slowly, with the deliberation of a body operating outside conscious control. It reached for the book on the desk. Her fingers touched the cover, the worn cloth, the cool surface. As she pulled it toward her, the pages rustling, the sound obscenely loud in the silence between breaths. The shadow stopped breathing. The silence that followed was absolute, deeper than silence had any right to be. A vacuum that seemed to pull at her eardrums, at her skin, at the very air in her lungs. The shadow had frozen in its position, its base now level with her desk, its top still anchored near the ceiling. It had become, for this moment, merely a shadow again, an absence of light that might have been there all along, that she might have imagined into threatening form. Then it moved again, not slowly this time, not with the gradual elongation of something patient and stalking. It moved quickly, a sudden contraction that pulled its base away from her desk, that drew it back toward the wall, that gathered its length into a dense knot of darkness at the ceiling's edge. The student's chair scraped against the floor. The sound echoed through the rear section, through the shelves, through the space where the shadows lived. She stood, her body finally responding to the imperative that had been building in her nerves, her muscles, her bones. The book fell from her grip and landed on the desk with a soft thump. The shadow fell from the ceiling. It dropped like water, like oil, like something dense and liquid that had been clinging to an upper surface and suddenly released its hold. It pooled on the floor where her chair had been, a black puddle that spread across the tiles, that reached toward her feet, that absorbed the light from her desk and returned nothing. As she stepped back, her heel struck the leg of the desk, and she stumbled, her arms flailing for balance, her hands finding the edge of the shelf behind her. The atlases shifted against her weight, their spines pressing into her back, holding her upright. The puddle on the floor began to rise. It lifted from the center, gathering itself into a column, a shape that grew upward from the spreading base, that took on dimensions that approximated something human, something that had been human once, something that had forgotten the precise configuration of limbs and torso, but still remembered the general form. It rose until it stood as tall as a person, as tall as the student herself, a figure of absolute darkness against the gray of the wall, against the dim glow of the distant shelves, against the flickering light of the fluorescent tube above her desk. The figure had no face. The space where a face should be held only deeper darkness, an absence so complete that it seemed to pull at her vision, to draw her gaze into its void. But something moved within that absence, something that might have been eyes opening, or a mouth forming, or a hand reaching from within the dark toward the light, where she stood frozen against the shelf. The breathing resumed, not from the figure, not from the space it occupied, but from behind her, from within the shelf, from between the atlases that pressed against her spine. Each breath warm now, warm against the back of her neck, warm through the fabric of her shirt, warm against the skin that crawled at its approach. The figure before her raised one arm. The darkness extended toward her, a hand forming at its end, fingers elongating from the mass, each one reaching, each one longer than any human finger had a right to be. Behind her, the breathing quickened.